Well, hello everybody. Now we are into the topic of the arrangement of material, the parts of a discourse. This is a very critical part of the course because here is where you will learn how to put together your papers. When I use the word papers, I could be talking about an essay, but also your research papers should look like this PowerPoint tells you that you need to arrange your material. Disposition, which means arrangement for us, is what we will be presenting in the introduction to this presentation. Then we will take each one of the parts of discourse, separated in detail, explain and with examples. These are the introduction, statement of fact, confirmation, refutation, and conclusion. Arrangement, in the most narrow sense, is concerned with identifying the parts of a text and organizing those parts into a whole. Classical rhetoric focused on oral speeches, but arrangement has evolved to deal with written text, and more recently the visual design of text, as well as the interplay of visual and oral design in electronic media. The classical rhetoricians dealt with the problems of selection and arrangement under the part of rhetoric that the Greeks called taxis and the Latins called dispositio. We will use the term arrangement. Arrangement is intimately related to genre. A genre, as Charles Bazerman puts it, is a social construct that regularizes communication, interactions, and relations. When a text is perceived to have structural properties that identify it as a certain type, then it is said to belong to a certain genre. Lab report, job application letter, detective fiction, legal brief, newspaper story, for example. Once the arguments are discovered, they must be organized, and that's when arrangement or disposition come into play. So we have the exordium or introduction, the narratio or statement of facts, the confirmatio or proof of our case, the refutatio or discrediting of the opposing views, the peroratio or conclusion. All of these will be explained within the next few slides. The five parts of a discourse. Introduction. The introduction serves two purposes: to inform the audience of the subject of the discourse and to render the audience amenable to the speaker's argument. Statement of fact. This section informs the audience of the circumstances that must be known before the formal argument is presented. Confirmation, the core of discourse in which the argument is presented and proven. In the confirmation is basically what the body of your paper is. Refutation can be achieved in a variety of ways, including logical appeal, emotional appeal, ethical appeal, wit. And the conclusion. You restate the facts and arguments, amplify the force of one's points, and diminish that of one's opponents, inspire through one's character, the ethos, rouse appropriate emotion, the pathos. The exordium or introduction, in terms of the etymology of the word, it means a leading into. The Latin term meant beginning a web. Generally, this preparation of the audience has a twofold aspect: inform the audience of the end or object of our paper, of our discourse, of our writing, and it disposes the audience to be receptive to what we have to say. Remember that in your introduction, you need to write a hook which attracts your reader's attention, but you also need to, somewhere in your introduction, write your thesis. We will be talking about 5 types of introduction. The first one, the inquisitive, to show that your subject is important, curious, or interesting. The paradoxical, to show that although the points that you're trying to establish seem improbable, they must, after all, be admitted. The corrective, to show that your subject has been neglected, misunderstood, or misinterpreted. The preparatory, to explain an unusual mode or way of developing your subject, or to forestall some misconception of your purpose, or to apologize for some deficiencies. And finally, the narrative, to rouse interest in your subject by adopting the anecdotal lead-in. The second part of a discourse is the narratio or statement of facts. The statement of fact is fundamentally expository. Here you inform your audience of the facts that must be known before proceeding to your argument. Quintilian advises that the narratio be lucid, brief, and plausible. If your readers already know enough about the topic, you can dispense with this section altogether. You must adopt the ad hoc situation. Use your common sense. The statement of fact. In scholarly articles, authors summarize the history of the idea they are going to discuss in their article. You may also include a history of what others have thought or said about the subject. Its plausibility results from the ethical tone of the discourse itself or from the ethical image of the writer. Readers will believe that the situation is as it has been described if they trust the authority of the character of the writer. The credibility of the statement of fact is enhanced by not saying anything contrary to nature or to historical fact, by assigning believable causes or reasons for events. The third part of a discourse is the confirmation or proof of the case. This is the section where you write your traditional body paragraphs. You make your arguments and defend them with analysis. This is the longest part of your papers. Confirmation. It is in this part of the discourse that you use the material gathered. When I say discourse, is written discourse. In composition, you must learn how to select and arrange your material. The order of your arguments. Generally, it is not advisable to present arguments in descending order of strength, as it has a debilitating anticlimactic effect. The proper sequencing of arguments depends on the disposition of the audience, the subject, the occasion, and the subjective tastes of the writer. Order of arguments continued. The material should be arranged in chronological order. This is when it's possible to do so. The general rule in argumentative discourse is to present your arguments from the weakest to the strongest. This way, you leave your audience with the climactic moment. If you have both weak and strong arguments, another possibility is that you start with a strong argument, then slip in a weak one, and end up with the strongest. The fourth part of a discourse is the refutation. Almost always there is an opposing view. You need to anticipate and address the objections to your thesis. You may even have to present the opposing views before your own. Sometimes you leave this part for the end of your argument. As a writer, you must be prepared to adapt and adjust your strategy to fit your particular situation or context. There are four means of refutation: by appeal to reason, by emotional appeal, by ethical appeal, and by wit. Rhetorical strategies, refutation. First, the appeal by reason. There are two ways of refuting a proposition. Prove that the proposition is contradictory. A thing cannot at the same time be and not be. Demolish the arguments of the proposition. Deny its truth by proving through evidence or testimony that the premise is false, or by objecting to the inferences. You say things such as, I admit the principle, but I deny that it leads to such a consequence. Or, your assertion is true, but it has no force as an argument to support your conclusion. Second, we have the emotional appeals or appeal by emotion. Knowledge about the audience is crucial when using emotional appeals. The more homogeneous the audience, the easier it is to appeal to emotions. When addressing a large heterogeneous audience, you must estimate which emotional appeals are likely to succeed with the majority of the audience. Third, the ethical appeal. It is very important to this part of your discourse. When I say this part, it is the refutation part, right? For Aristotle, it is more fitting for a good man to display himself as an honest fellow than a subtle reasoner. Sometimes, if the argument is weak, the ethical appeal exerted by the image of the writer is sufficient to get the message across for people to understand your argument. Refutation by wit. According to Merriam-Webster, wit is defined as an ability to say or write things that are clever and usually funny. Jests, sarcasm, and irony can be effective tools for refutation. Here are a few more notes related to refutation by appeal to wit. The fifth part of a discourse is your conclusion. From the Latin peroratio, of finishing off your plea. The last part of your discourse is the one that lingers longest in your audience's memory, so you should make an effort to make it memorable. Here, you should pull off the stops where you display the most conspicuous stylistic eloquence and emotional intensity. If you have troubles with your conclusion, here we have Aristotle with his four things that we should include in our conclusions, or that we should have in our conclusions. First, it needs to inspire the audience with a favorable opinion of ourselves and unfavorable opinion of our opponents. To amplify the force of the points we have made in the previous section and to extenuate the force of the points made by the opposition, to rouse the appropriate emotions in the audience, and to restate in a summary way our facts and arguments. Remember, this is very important, this last point. In your conclusion, you summarize your main points, you restate your thesis, reword your thesis, and because you're argumenting, this is the part in your paper where you call people to action or for them to agree with your points. Here are my references. On our next class, I will be bringing some exercises so that you can apply the concepts learned in this PowerPoint presentation. I will see you next time Always remember, learning is fun and it is a lifelong journey. Goodbye.